I mean, Oracle is actually providing so that you could buy their cloud services, but all of the technology that you would need could be put right in your own data center. You would not manage it. Oracle would still manage it just like they would if it was in their data center, but it would be in your own. So that, people don't think of that necessarily as cloud, but that would be considered utilizing cloud because it would use the same type of services and subscriptions and so forth that you would purchase as if you had if you bought it through Oracle to run in their own data center. And also in those situations, there may be systems that are only internally used. So that may not even be accessible via the public internet. Even the type of software licenses you own doesn't necessarily dictate if the end solution is cloud-based or not. Software licenses could be perpetually owned licenses that you had when on-premise, but now you're using, you want to use towards the cloud. It could be subscription or some portion of metered use purchase. So there's many different ways you could go about utilizing it. So at this stage, it may be best to describe cloud as a solution that leverages all or a portion of third-party resources for a particular solution. Okay. All right. So onto this, basically I want to line out what's the most common forms of cloud services. Now, Oracle pushes these particular, from the perspective of SaaS solutions and software as a service, platform as a service, internet as a service, infrastructure as a service, as the classic ones where all of their products fit. Some of their products can kind of bridge one or two of these, depending upon what you purchase. The SaaS ones are the easiest ones for people to understand are Salesforce, but with Oracle you could have, their Fusion software could run as SaaS and so forth. So there's a lot of things. SaaS has been around for a while, and there's solutions that organizations still look to take a certain common business function and utilize SaaS to meet those needs. I added hosting on here mainly because in conversations with clients, they seem to, literally put that in the exact same conversation of utilizing cloud as they do utilizing any of these other services. So they are seeing that as cloud as well. Even though it's not quite the same, there are some differences, but it is pretty common. Most time when people think of cloud computing today, they think of Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Oracle Cloud to provide these, but it also is the others.
Yeah, and just to chime in on this slide, Oracle does have many competitors in each of these categories. However, with Oracle's significant investment into its various cloud offerings over the last few years, the growth in these areas has been staggering, as we've seen in the numbers, and as well as the migrations of companies to certain areas here. So, Oracle's absolutely, going across the board in terms of growth and investment into these areas. Back to you, Wayne.
Definitely, thanks, Elliot. And the infrastructure as a service is probably the most common that we see when people are kind of trying to move stuff to the cloud, and it's the most talked about of late. That's been Amazon Web Services for a long time. That's essentially what their services provide. But they're also, Microsoft Azure does the same thing. Oracle Cloud does the same thing, offers that. That's basically just offering the infrastructure, not the software, right? It's kind of a bring your own license scenario. And you're just choosing a particular footprint for to run your software. Now, based on the footprint of the processing footprint that you subscribe to from the vendor, that's how it's calculated. Oracle looks and has particular policy in regards to counting the use. And it's very similar to on-premise, a couple little variations, but it's similar, to allocate the proper amount of licenses from your on-premise use to cloud use. PaaS, which is the platform as a service, that's kind of the newer kid on the block, because it includes licensing costs and hardware costs, but not the content. So example of this could be Oracle Database. Now sure, Amazon Web Services does offer database licensing for Oracle, but it is only for Standard Edition 1. And so since that's a very limited product, most times we are not seeing anyone really utilize that anymore. They're usually just bringing their own license. Another area, I mean, just as a kind of an offshoot, is even like Office 365 by Microsoft. I mean, that's a type of platform as a service. It's an Office platform that you're subscribing to, and that's how you're getting your licenses. So it kind of falls in that same kind of concept. The software is delivered via the cloud. It's not delivered as a SaaS per se because it's kind of used for whatever you may need to use it for, but it's a license subscription. And the use of the software is completely in the hands of the client organization to manage it. Okay. All right. So now, what assets work well in the cloud? So there's a couple things here that it's probably easier just to kind of discuss, almost how things fit or don't fit. At this stage, organizations can find a cloud-based service or solution for just about any business function, along with some very vertical industry functions. However, even though a function like HR management may seem somewhat standard, the needs of a particular organization must be considered closely. Many SaaS solutions allow some customizations, but they'll have limits to those customizations, and you never want to force your organization to run in a manner that's solely dictated by the requirements of a software service. If a solution fits your needs, great. If it requires a few minor workarounds, then it should still work fine. But if you have to force it, then consider how well the organization is going to be able to effectively adopt its use. Many organizations have been adopting cloud-first policies, where they first consider a cloud-based solution for any new need. If a cloud solution does not exist for their need or the requirements of that need, then they can build it on-premise. The proper fit is critical. Many organizations are considering price and cost savings to be the driving reason to shift to cloud. Also, many of the cloud vendors utilize cost savings as a main driver to sell you these services. But the organizations that have adopted such cloud-first policies have found that the cost is really virtually a wash from when compared to on-premise. Doesn't mean that a value is not realized by shifting to cloud services. It just means that the value is more derived from the reallocation of costs. So instead of having a whole team that is managing your infrastructure, you're kind of shifting that more, so maybe you have a larger team that is doing development. So they're actually kind of more working on closer to things that have a bigger impact on the business than just managing technology resources in a data center. But without a doubt, it stresses the cost must not be the main driver for the change. Because even if the cloud costs don't offer savings, they do offer savings right now, they may not in the future as costs are raised across cloud services vendors as their prices increase. And from what we hear from plenty of different organizations and from what we've seen, there is a heavy sense that once this pricing war diminishes and cloud services become more commonplace among all the marketplaces, then there's a full expectation that those prices are going to increase.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that point, you know, the big fury of competition that Oracle has seen across these cloud pillars absolutely has impacted price. Oracle has not been, you know, as quick as some of its competitors to really drop to bargain basement pricing, which is a good thing for Oracle business and in substantiating its value and they go forward. But there's still, you know, pricing that is a lot more competitive today than it will be tomorrow. So, you know, the logic being that the cloud transactions that are being executed and now and within the next few cycles will be absolutely more advantageous to the client than the cloud transactions that are, you know, executed, you know, maybe in another fiscal year or two. So, you know, in the case of trying to negotiate, you know, a longer-term cloud transactions with more locked-in pricing, more favorable non-discount terms and conditions, you know, this is probably a really solid time to look at that now. Go back to you, Wayne.
Okay. And also to remember that, you know, proper fit doesn't require a 100% cloud solution. I mean, you can keep some stuff on premise. That is the expectation, really, among many organizations. You know, generally, what we're seeing is really only the smallest of startups will go totally cloud right from the start. Most other organizations are going to deal with a hybrid long into the future. There's going to be some stuff they'll run local, some stuff they'll put in the cloud. Specific to the infrastructure as a service solutions, it's pretty common that many begin through using DevTest, putting DevTest up there. Not a bad idea. I mean, even Oracle has been recommending that for a while. It gives you an idea to kind of figure out, okay, how does this work? You can actually test how you think things will work for production before you go and push something up there and bite off the whole thing going up into the cloud. So that's pretty common for the infrastructure as a suite among a lot of different vendors for that, but Oracle definitely. All right, what assets work better on premise? Now, with legacy solutions, and these are solutions that were built many years ago, they're built before cloud server structures existed, so they're built really for a server-centric platform. Those situations, database solution needs to be redeveloped to function on cloud infrastructure. And in a lot of cases, such a redevelopment can make a shift to the cloud less cost effective. So people are kind of like less likely to try and take something old and throw it up there than they would if it's just a brand new need. Also, cloud use for a heavily integrated solution can be difficult if many of the legacy on-premise solutions need to stay in sync constantly. So if you've got a lot of organizations have multiple data centers, and they could have different solutions running in different data centers, and the connectivity has to be pretty consistent. And a lot of these solutions, they're not the same solution. There may be different solutions, but they are sharing data, and they're sharing data in a consistent manner. If you were to take just one of those and put them into the cloud, then what can happen is you start to run into latency issues. It takes a little longer, and it can cause issues. So typically, if you have a lot of stuff that's talking together, it can be a lot easier to keep it on premise if you can't take them all and put them up on the cloud. So that's what we see. Of course, if there's something that is, you know, a hybrid solution could work where you don't have that constant data connection requirement, then it can work. You can have it. We do it ourselves, where we have a local solution that's running, and then it ties into some external cloud services for extra functionality we look for. Also, large bandwidth requirements can also cause cloud solutions to be a problem because any solution that's mission critical should have dedicated links to any cloud-based services. So you really shouldn't be utilizing VPN connections over public internet, because should there be any kind of internet disturbance, and we see this, probably every couple of months, where there's some type of an attack out there, it affects the bandwidth of the whole internet. So even though you're through a VPN connection, your security is fine. Just because of that connection, since it's going through the regular internet, your speeds can be affected. So many organizations will actually put in private links to those, particularly for anything that's mission critical. So when you factor in the costs of that, if it's large enough bandwidth requirements, then sometimes that can make the cloud less ideal, and you'd want to do it on premise. Finally, the data sovereignty rules can vary by country, and those can restrict the location to an extent that conflicts the location of data to an extent that conflicts with requirements of a cloud solution. So, and it varies by country. So it's particularly if you're an international company and you have it in a bunch of different organizations, sometimes you're not allowed to be running and storing data that is meant for the German organization storing it in the US or storing it someplace else. So that comes into play a lot as well. And they could be challenging because a lot of the data sovereignty rules are a little bit, can be vague sometimes, and they can be extremely difficult to try and iron out a solution that's not a problem. So, but it's definitely something that some companies and countries and municipalities and governments deal with, and some look to be much more stringent than others. So that can affect it. Risks and challenges. As I stated previously, the legacy solution can be a risk if you got to make a lot of changes to get it working up there, which is always why it's good to try and run the dev test version of it up there just to see if it's going to be any kind of issues. Also, legacy software contracts can have conditions that restrict their use in cloud environments. We know this to be the case with Oracle ULA contracts. We've seen this over the past 2 years, that Oracle has been adding language that basically enables you to use the licenses that you get under your ULA during the term of the ULA in the cloud. But when you certify, you are not able to count any of the processors, servers, and so forth, the infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, to be used for the licenses you will get at the certification. So it's really kind of a messed up situation, because you could literally certify and then the very next day you're out of compliance in your cloud because you didn't get any licenses for use in the cloud. But you're using a bunch with it.
Yeah, and just add some 2 cents there. This has been a real challenge for some clients to understand, especially in the case of renewals and renewals of ULAs and certifications of ULAs. Probably one of the biggest areas of confusion for Oracle clients in the ULA renewal or certification process is when maybe some assumptions of usage maybe are proved false within the cloud deployments versus on-premise. Many clients say, well, what's the difference? I've been deploying to hosted environments in the past or data centers in the past. Why is the cloud so different in terms of my usage abilities? So it's important that you review the contract language specifically, because you may be maybe signing for something that is just not quite what you expected. And this could also happen in cases of amendments to the ULAs during renewals. It can also happen during a certain certification process where you may have certain amendments that are needed signing and not just a simple certification. It could also be in the case where certain products are added to a ULA. So you may think of it as, it's just going to be the same old ULA, but just extended by another year. While the language that gets added could be a little different. There's a lot of things that would have to be reviewed, due diligence, and negotiated. But this is an area that definitely has jumped out to a lot of clients as very surprising. It could possibly hurt the strategy that maybe you're trying to accomplish, which is having on-premise and cloud being seamless, and usage of licensing perhaps at your convenience being utilized on-premise until needed to be deployed in cloud. Back to you, Wayne.
Yep, and also to add to that, some solutions like proprietary hosting solutions, and these are solutions that are internally developed, but they're running on, let's say, database. Oracle requires a particular way to license those because they're written for use by clients, by the clients of a particular organization, and they build it to be used by it, but it's running on Oracle. And in those situations, historically, Oracle has never allowed you to run them in a hosted environment. It can only be run in your own data center. But we've seen that start to shift for obvious reasons. Oracle is going to loosen up on it because they don't want to. They would love you to use their Oracle Cloud and put your solutions up there, but it breaks their own rules. So, as with Oracle, they can shift their rules and policies as they go in many cases. So, it's another thing to watch out for. Also, another big thing with hosting vendors to be very careful of. It basically implies that their solutions will be covered by your licensing used within their environment. Now, this wouldn't be in situations where the hosting vendor is providing you all the licensing, right? So they're handling that all behind the scenes. These are for situations where you're providing some level of licensing. They're not providing all the licensing. Maybe they're just running your data center. Maybe they're doing a little bit more than that, but you are providing licensing for that. We've seen this in many cases. It's disturbing how common it is, but the vendors will kind of imply that certain solutions of theirs and the way that they handle things has been approved by Oracle. But when upon further discussion and questioning, it turns out that no, it's not. And the difficulty is that they're never liable for any kind of compliance issue that could happen to you. So if all of a sudden they're running a VMware environment, they don't have it configured in a certain fashion, then if Oracle comes after you for an audit and they search that data center for everything that's running in it, you could be responsible for licensing a lot more than just your own equipment. And that's just one example. We also see the way these vendors handle the area that can be a challenge. Okay. Now, another aspect to understand and consider is the decreased amount of flexibility that a cloud solution provides. These are subscription services, and they can include hardware, software licenses, and services. But unlike premise solutions, where an organization can drop support or shift to a third-party support if they need to kind of free up costs in a pinch, under a subscription service, everything's bundled. So the price is the price. It's going to be all or nothing, particularly if you get everything under that subscription software and hardware. So if you need to cut costs, you can't. And that leaves you with less options in the future. So that's something else. It's a flexibility aspect. You're paying for that in a different way. And then along that same lines, there's a potential for increased training costs. Most companies, they don't keep their software at the latest version all the time. If you're buying your licenses to subscriptions, then the vendor is going to be pushing out the latest and greatest versions. We know that to be the case with Oracle Database in a PaaS solution, in a platform as a service. They're going to keep you to 12 or 11, and they're going to keep you on the latest. So if you've got something on 10, you obviously can't move it to a PaaS environment. You could move it to an IaaS environment and just bring your own license. But once you are in an environment, they are advanced in a platform environment, and they advance the version, they're typically going to force you to keep it at that latest and greatest, not to have too much lag on it. So you have to be careful there, because all of a sudden that can force you into new upgrades when you're not really planning on it, or training. Office 365 is another example of that, where they require you to, and that's with Microsoft, to be on the latest version of Office. You can have up to about a year of a lag, but still, you're going to need that constant training, and a lot of companies don't really want to do that. So that's another thing to consider. And then finally, Ellie, do you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, just getting into questions, but if you want to wrap up, you can do that.
Okay. I'm just, in regards to the last slide, avoiding and navigating, most of this is similar to the stuff that we've already talked about. Make sure about the contracts. Be careful of the prop hosting and software host applications, which is Microsoft's version of that same concept. Beware of those hosting vendors. And then utilizing cloud services never means you can ignore license compliance concerns. So you want to be careful that you don't make that assumption. Okay, Elliot, we can move on to questions.
Okay, I guess first and foremost, question one is in terms of license compliance. Do I now with cloud need to ignore, I guess, potential audit or compliance? What is my risk? Well, I guess getting to the bottom line of that answer is this: and I've said this on prior webinars quite often, that with software licensing, you don't own the license. You own the right to use the license in a very specific way with software, and the same is true with agreements, subscription-based agreements. You don't own the software. You own the right to use it in a specific way, judged by your subscription rights. And there's still an element there where you need to know what you're entitled to use, what you're not entitled to use, and if it's not spelled out in the agreement, chances are you do not have a right to use it. And we find that in many of these cloud agreements, the assumption of usage and what you're entitled to could somehow be poor assumptions once users start complaining that maybe they did not have the same access and the same abilities that they had under the on-premise versions. So it's really important that you game that out properly. And then the other question that we have here is in terms of legacy. What are my rights to legacy on-premise when I move to cloud deployment? And I could say it kind of in the same breath that it's the same issue with legacy versus cloud, in that you have only entitlements that are spelled out in your cloud agreement. If it's not spelled out in a cloud agreement that you're entitled to an on-premise legacy copy, then you're not entitled to that legacy copy. You will still need to maintain compliance as per your on-premise software agreements. So nothing changes. So in the event that you need to run on-premise and cloud simultaneously, you need to ensure that you are compliant to both agreements. And so if you are like most companies, it doesn't just turn off like a switch. You are going to be running some level of on-premise for a certain period of time, and it's important that you understand the compliance rules still need to be maintained during that period. Sean, I think we're out of time.
This concludes today's webinar.